Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for attending today. My name is Ronnie Rios. I'm a solutions consultant here at FileMaker, and we have a fantastic webinar for you today. I'm joined by fellow Business Alliance member Wim de Kort from Soliant Consulting, who will be giving us a tour of some of the great new features in the new FileMaker Server admin console. But before we get started, let's spend a minute or two covering some few house brief keeping notes. For the best experience, we strongly recommend that you participate in this web seminar with at least a broadband connection. If you have any problems or require online assistance at any time, please contact Citrix Technical Support at 888-259-8414. Again, that number is 888-259-8414. During today's presentation, you will have the opportunity to submit some questions. So let's talk really quickly about how you can send us your questions. Simply go to the control panel, click on the questions section, type in your question, and click on the send button. We'll cover as many questions as time allows at the end of our presentation, but remember, you don't have to wait till the end to send your questions. So with that, let's get started. With the newly released FileMaker Platform 17, we've introduced a lot of new great features, and some of them obviously in the FileMaker Server 17. We've added a new FileMaker Server admin console. It's been completely redesigned to be more lightweight and provide a simpler, more responsive user interface that allows for easier viewing on different screen sizes and devices. The admin console has a lot of great features, including a dashboard page for easily monitoring hosting your hosted custom apps, connected users, and even statistics. Plus, it gets actionable notifications that provide much more details about handling error messages. In addition, new in FileMaker Server 17 is also the FileMaker Admin API. You can use this REST API to give you more flexibility in managing and administrating FileMaker Server. Now, this API has been designed and introduced as a trial so that we can gather more customer feedback for possible future improvements. Not unlike what we did with the FileMaker Data API in 16 has come out of trial here in the FileMaker 17. Now, moving forward, we obviously plan to continue investing in the FileMaker Admin API. Now, to dive in deeper on here the FileMaker Server Admin Console, the Admin API, and other tools that help you administrate FileMaker Server is Wim de Kort.
All right, thank you, Ronnie. And thank you all for being here today and sharing this hour with us and learn a little more about FileMaker Server and the admin interfaces. Because we've always had an admin console going way back in different forms and shapes, and we now have a brand new one in 17, a completely revamped one. We also have the new admin API that Ronnie mentioned, and we also have the admin CLI, or the command line interface, that has been around for a while. So we will dive into all three of them. And then at the end of the presentation, we will go briefly into some of the tools that are available to keep track of your deployment, like how well is it doing, what events are happening, and how well is it performing. Before we dive into the console API and CLI, I want to remind you that at the link that you see on your screen there, you can download three tech briefs that have been co-authored by Stephen Blackwell and myself. Stephen Blackwell has forgotten more about the FileMaker platform than I currently know. So we have one about the admin console, the CLI, and the admin API. There is one specifically for monitoring, and there is one that has to do with SSL certificates and all things SSL, which is a must read for any FileMaker Server deployment. So I'll refer back to these documents often during my presentation, and we will show the link again at the end of it. Now, before we get into the new stuff, I want to make sure that we are clear on the things that have been removed from FileMaker Server, just briefly. And these are the features, the only features that have been removed from FileMaker Server, right? The first one is LDAP registration. The screenshot that you see is a screenshot of the old admin console, and it points to where that tab is, the directory service tab, and that has been removed. Now, mind you, that has nothing to do with external authentication, right? It never had anything to do with external authentication. It was just a matter of basically writing an entry into a phone book, into an LDAP directory service phone book, and that is gone. Also gone are sub-admin groups. And also no longer in the admin console is the ability to generate a certificate signing request for your SSL certificate, right? The screenshot is from the old admin console. So that particular part of the UI is no longer available in the admin console. And lastly, the feature to set up a primary and a standby FileMaker server has also been removed from FileMaker Server 17, right? So these are the things that, that are gone. And what do we have now? So as mentioned, we have the 3 admin touch points, the console, the API, and the command line. So we'll talk about the console first. And it has been rebuilt from the ground up, right? Some of you may know that the console that we've had since FileMaker 13 was built on the same technology that drives WebDirect, right? And that's been replaced now by a very lightweight admin console that under the hood uses that same admin API that we have at our disposal to do our own thing with. So it basically uses the API under the hood as well. In that, and you may, for those of you who are intimately familiar with the admin console for FileMaker Cloud, it'll look very similar, right? Because that's exactly what it is to a large extent. So given how different it looks, there's no surprise that it also works slightly differently. And it also contains fewer settings than the admin consoles from 13 to 16 that you may have been used to. And in that sense, the first of those tech briefs that I mentioned has a lot of detailed information about those settings. There's a big section of that tech brief that describes a full side-by-side of the old admin console and the new one. So if you are familiar with the old console, you can use that as your guide to figure out, okay, I know where the setting was in 16, where is it in 17? That's one big section of that tech brief. Another one basically lists all of the different admin functions that you would want to do with your FileMaker server. And it's basically like a matrix, right? So it lists the actions on the left-hand side, and then across the columns, you have a column for the console, a column for the API, and a column for the CLI, the command line. And it'll tell you basically across which of those 3 touch points that particular action that you have in mind is available. All right. Let's do a quick walk around of that. What I have going here is a FileMaker Server 17 running on AWS. It runs on Windows Server 16. And as mentioned, if you are familiar with the FileMaker Cloud interface, it looks very, very similar, right? So we have our dashboard, gives us some good information. We have our files and our users that are currently connected. One quick feature here, if you're used to the old 16 one, this was more of a horizontal thing where it shows your files and what technologies it was enabled for. That's still available, right? So you can go in here and show extended privileges, and that shows you through what technologies that one is available. We have our backups and our backup schedules. That's different than in 16. In 16, there was one interface for your schedules, your backup and your script schedules, your script sequence schedules, and the other schedule was in one interface. Now it's broken up into backup schedules here, and I have an hourly one going, and there is a script schedule interface that is separate, right? So your script schedules and your backup schedules are in a different place. If I go in here quickly, it's one thing that has caused some confusion that we've seen on the forums, where people are asking, how do I set up an hourly repeating schedule, right? So I just created a new schedule, and over here where it says repeat, I'll flip it from once to daily. And then when I have my daily schedule, right here where it says time, I can now flip this to between. I can set my start time and end time, and that's where I can set it to repeat every 1 hour if I want to set it that way. All right, so the settings, there's a natural flow to the settings, and you'll have to click through it to get to this point where you can set your repetition for it to be hourly. All right. One thing that you may see here, and I have a backup schedule, but it runs every hour. When I go into here, I can see some backups that have already been done. And as you can see, it runs every midnight. So clearly, this is not my hourly backup schedule that I have configured and that's already been running. It's something to note and to remember. and we'll work with that when we get to the command line interface. Every FileMaker server that you install comes in with an automatic nightly backup schedule. And you cannot disable that schedule from here, but you can from the command line, as we will show in a moment. And this is where the script schedules would be. One other quick thing that I wanted to note, that if you have any plugins that are installed, and it's a slight UI difference between 16, you can come in here, you can enable the server to use plugins. It's only when you install plugins that they will show up here, right? So the interface in 17 is dynamic and will show and basically grow and shrink as is necessary to allow things to show up where you may have been used to 16, where there's dedicated, always open areas of information that may be blank if nothing is there. So be a little prepared for that. There's a slight difference in approach here in how the 17 admin console works. And that's a very quick tour of some of the features that I wanted to highlight in the admin console for 17. The full walkthrough is in that tech brief, right? So, and that's a really long tech brief, by the way. I believe it's something like 60 pages. At DevCon, I will be presenting a session that goes into this a whole lot more detail. So feel free to join me there as well. So that was the admin console. For the most part, the admin console is what people have been using since forever, since we had one, to do most of their interaction with FileMaker Server, right? And we said in the beginning, there's the admin console that we have in 17 has a fewer settings than the one in 16. It doesn't mean that those settings are gone, right? That's really something that I want to drive home, and that's why I had the slide with the explicit slide with the features that have been removed from 17. When you see something that you were used to seeing in the admin console, a setting, and you don't see it in the admin console, you can be rest assured that it's still available. You'll have to make a trip to the command line or to the admin API or any tool built on the admin API, and we'll cover some of those in a second, to make those settings. The admin CLI is the second of those three touch points, right? Console, CLI, API. And the command line interface has been around since a really long time as well. So I really see this as my trusted servant. It's a very quick way to do things while you're on the server. And that's the main difference between the admin console and the admin API on the one hand and the command line interface on the other hand. The command line interface works when you're on the machine itself. And yes, you can make it work remotely by creating a secure tunnel and all of these things, but really, if you want to make a distinction between this one and the other two, it's that this one largely, by and large, is meant to be run from the FileMaker Server machine itself. And it works exactly the same. All the commands are the same on Windows and on Mac, right? So there's no syntax difference between the two. You can see a quick list of the commands there that are available through the FMS admin API. The two that are really important to note is the new get and the new set. It's through those get and set that you can read some of those configuration options that you may, some of them are on the admin console, some of them are not. So you can read them with get, and you can set them or change them with the set command. So we'll go into that in a little demo. If I go back to my FileMaker Server, and I'll start with this, right? So this is the help for the get function. It's pretty much the same as the help for the set function, but you can see some of the configurations that you can, settings that you can change, right? So there's a server config section within the get command, and it shows you what your progressive backup interval is, your cache size, the size of your log files, how many PS perform script on server sessions you can have, what your statistics logging interval is. And this is also not in server config, but in CWP config, where you can enable and disable the PHP web publishing and the XML API, right? So that's how you bring up the help. If I will ask for what my server config is currently, and this is the really nice thing about it. So these are the different settings that I can set if I wanted to, but I'm just asking through the get what they currently are, right? So I can see here what my settings are currently. It also shows you what my default is, right? So this makes it really easy if you log into a server that you did not set up. you can come in here and see what it is and see whether it differs from the default. And you can also see the range, the maximum, the minimum and the maximum that you can set them to. So if I do the same and I switch this to CWP config, then I can see that my PHP web publishing is off, and it's off by default. My XML I turned on. It is off by default, and some of the other settings. Now, I mentioned that every FileMaker server comes with a default backup schedule, and that you cannot see it from the admin console, right? So if I do it from here, I can see that I have 3 schedules. And the first one, called FMS, is that midnight backup schedule, right? Then I have my hourly backup schedule, and I was playing around with a messaging schedule as well that is also listed there, but that is disabled, right? So this is where we can see all the schedules. What if I wanted to disable that midnight backup schedule, right? So what if the midnight time frame is not the best time frame for that particular customer? I can use the FMS admin command line and issue this command, right? Disable schedule and then the ID of the schedule, which is 1, as we can see here from the ID. And as we can see, we now get confirmation that the midnight backup schedule is disabled, so it won't run anymore. So this is one way, and we describe that in a lot of detail as well in the tech briefs, but that's one of the ways that you can interact with the command line interface on the FileMaker server machine itself to see settings, change settings, work with the schedules, and do some of these things. And then we have our third one, and the newest that we have of our the ways that we can administer a FileMaker server, and that's the admin API. The admin API, very much like the data API, turns your FileMaker server into a RESTful web service, right? So you make calls to it in a REST fashion, meaning that you construct a URL, you tell it what HTTP methods, get, post, put, patch, any of the supported ones that you want to use. Part of the URL, in the anatomy of the URL, it basically, there's an endpoint at the end, as the term implies, that tells you what the action that you want FileMaker server to perform. And then you specify some headers, a payload, a body, and you get a response. In essence, that's how the admin API works, just like any other REST web service. And since it's a web service, you can use any tool that you fancy to make those calls, right? You can do it from the command line using curl. You can do it from inside FileMaker using the insert from URL with curl options, script step that we have. You can use any tool that is capable of creating those calls and make those. And let's do a quick demo of that. If I go back to my FileMaker server, right, and the admin API is available, the documentation for that is available on your FileMaker server, right? You can see the URL here, FMI admin API doc, and it's a very good API documentation, right? So on the left-hand side, you'll see the calls that you can make, and for each one, it'll tell you what's the HTTP method. In this case, it's a post. It'll tell you what the endpoint is. This is that part here where you append to your server URL. Specifies what headers, what body, and what response that you will get. Right. So all of the documentation is right there. If you download those tech briefs that we mentioned, you will get a full collection of those for a tool called Postman. Postman is just one of many tools, so don't take this as a blanket endorsement for this tool, but it's a great tool. It looks nice, works really well. Fiddler is another tool that we mentioned in that tech brief. So basically what I did here is I took all of those calls as per the API documentation and recreated them in Postman so that I can actually execute them from this tool, right? So as mentioned, you'll get this collection if you download the tech brief. And with this collection, the way that Postman works, so you can see this variable here called server. The way that Postman works with variables, you can basically change the variable of this server to any server address and then work with them, right? So you don't really need any more tools than this one if you want to have a bare bones tool to do all of the tasks that you want to do. right? And you can see this is where you set what type of call it is. And for a login, it's a post. This would be the full URL, including the endpoints. And then the body, as per the API documentation, I would pass it a username and a password, which is exactly the same as you would type in to log into your admin console proper. If I execute that, FileMaker Server sends me back this really long string that we can see here at the bottom, and that's my token, right? For any subsequent call that I make to the admin API, I will have to provide that token in the header, right? So this is the call to list all the databases and all the users. So you can see it's a get call. This is the URL. And in this particular case, I will have two headers. One to specify that we're talking JSON, right? That's just setting the language. And the second one is authorization. And this is where that token variable would go, right? And you can see it's not a variable. I don't have to type it in anymore. I can just log in, and let's do that for real. And if I go and say, for instance, say that I want to get my my server status, and I've just sent it, right? So basically now in Postman, we've asked FileMaker Server, what's your status? The result is null, so no error code, and the result is that it's running, so I'm fine. So you can use this as a little heartbeat to get going. All right. Remember when we talked about the command line interface that I showed how you can use it to get your current configuration. You can do the same with the admin API, right? So it's a get call to this URL. In my headers, I would have that same token that I need. And if I execute it, my token will be used and result null, or 0, I should say. So no error code. And you can see what my cache size is and my maximum number of perform script on server settings. All right. Now, if I want to change that, I make another call. In this case, it's a patch call to the same endpoints, and say that I want to update my cache to 800 megabytes and my perform script on server sessions to 150. If I execute that, my result is 0, so no error code. Now, just for fun, if I go back in here and do the get command, you can see that my changes have been properly applied, right? My cache size is now 800 megs, and my perform script on server sessions max is now back to it's been set to 150. If I don't like that, I can just switch them from here again, right? If I do fms admin set server config, then I would just have to specify cache size equals 512, which would have been the default, and script sessions, say that I want to set it to 100. And there you go. I have confirmation that my script sessions have been set to 100 and my cache is at 512 megabytes. All right. It's a good example of how you can manipulate the same settings from two of these three admin touch points, admin interfaces that we have in FileMaker Server. Now, I've mentioned this briefly before. The community has already rallied around this admin API, and we have some really good resources that people have built that take advantage of that admin API and have built their own admin consoles, right, to expose all the settings that they want to see in tools that they've built themselves. This one is from TMS software. It's largely, the form factor is largely for iPhone. This one is from Productive Computing. They have a course that they offer online, and when you go to their course, it's a free course, I believe, but if you go to it, you can download the tool that they've built in FileMaker to be a full-blown admin console with all the settings that are available to the admin API. This one is from my good friend Klaus, Datamanics out of Denmark. This one I particularly like because it not only exposes all of the admin console functionality, it also has a command line interface helper, right? So it'll help you construct those command line interface commands if you're not intimately familiar with it. So it's a great learning tool. Not only that, but you can log into your admin console from here. And way back at the beginning, we mentioned that the ability to generate the SSL signing request, the certificate signing request, has been removed from the FileMaker admin console API. It's not removed from FileMaker Server. You can still do it from the command line. What Klaus has done in his tool is he made that available from his admin console that he built in FileMaker. So you can use this tab and generate a signing request. And there's some general information about SSL that he has available as well. Now, my folks at Soliant have built something that is not FileMaker based. And this is a good example. It's called FMS ACE, hosted on the GitHub, and it's web-based. And what they wanted to demonstrate with that was, now that we have an admin API, we can build features that no admin console ever had. In this particular case, what we're showcasing is the ability to show your schedules in a calendar, right? And just all the consoles that we've had in the past and the current one just show your schedules in the list view, right? So this actually lets them be displayed in a calendar view, and you can create schedules from here, including some of the schedule types that you cannot create from the proper or the official admin console. So this one is on GitHub, open source. Anybody can download it and modify it. So as you can see, the community has already taken advantage of that admin API in a big way. And we expect to see more by the time DevCon rolls around so that we can showcase even more of those. In a nutshell, those were the three admin touch points: the console, the command line interface, and the API. Now, once you have your FileMaker Server set up, and clearly one of the design goals of this revamped FileMaker Server 17 admin console is to make it easier to set your server up. Once you have it set up, once you know how to manipulate the settings that you're after, you also have to keep track of how your server is doing, right? So you have to keep track of your performance counters, know what events are happening, and all of that are available in the log files that FileMaker Server keeps, right? So in 17, if you go to the configuration tab, all the way at the bottom on the left-hand side is a section called logging. And when you click this link, you get to pick what log you want to download, right? Unlike the consoles that we had in the past, there's no live event viewer. There's no live statistics viewer. Those have been removed from the console. The logs obviously are still available, and you can still monitor your FileMaker Server in other ways. The admin console itself lets you enable the top call stats log by default, right? But there's other logs that are at least as valuable as the top call stats log, right? The server stats log, the old style stats log, and the client stats log, right? You can enable those from the FileMaker Server FMS command line, and that's the command that you would use, right? So it's FMS admin enable, and then the name of the log that you would want to use. You may remember we used the disable command to disable the default backup schedule, right? If you're done logging and you don't want to log anymore, you would use the same one, FMS admin disable, and then the name of the log that you want to disable. Now, when it comes to monitoring your FileMaker Server for the core performance across the 4 traditional bottlenecks, right? Processing power, disk I/O, network throughput, and memory, FileMaker Server, and especially on Windows, still offers all of its counters that we're used to seeing in the old admin console. It still has those, and they're still available through FileMaker Server Performance Monitor, right? If you're going to the Windows Performance Monitor, you can select FileMaker Server. You'll see FileMaker Server 17 listed, and underneath that, you can pick all or just a few of those performance counters that have been available for a long time. With those tech briefs that I mentioned in the beginning and that we'll mention in the end, comes a complete set of Windows Perfmon configuration that you can use. One for 17, one for 16, because this is not new. It has been around for a while. And then one specifically for 17 that mimics just the 17 stats log. So if you want to use Perfmon, or your IT department wants to use Perfmon to keep an eye on your FileMaker Server, it certainly can. The tools are there. And to make it easier for you, we've made those available as sort of like pre-bundled, easy to install things in the Windows Perfmon. Now on the Mac side, you typically would use the activity monitor to have a quick view of what's going on, right? So if you fire up activity monitor, and over on the right-hand side, you filter by FMS, by the string FMS, you would see the FileMaker Server processes or daemons listed, right? And then with the tabs across the top there at the activity monitor, you can switch between those traditional 4 bottlenecks, processing, memory, disk, and network. Right, so that gives you a quick view of what's currently happening. You can get a more detailed view or from the command line if you want to script it by using the top command from terminal. And there's a few other commands that are available given the macOS Unix underpinnings. There's a fair number of commands that you can use in this fashion. When it comes to events on the Windows side, FileMaker Server keeps its own event log, just like it does on macOS. On Windows, it also writes those to the Windows application log, which is a very nice touch, and it has been doing that since forever. Again, this is not new to 17. What I particularly like about this is that this allows you to see events in a greater perspective, right? I can see what FileMaker Server is logging, and at the same time, I can see what anything else is logging, or Windows, or anything else. Perhaps IT has installed some backup software on there. I can see events in correlation to the timing of the FileMaker Server event, so it's really helpful to be able to do it this way. And if you're not familiar with the Windows Event Viewer, just know that you can also do this from any other Windows machine, right? So from this event viewer on, say, machine A, I can connect to the event logs on any FileMaker server that's out there, as long as you have the admin rights to do so. On Mac, you would use the console app, right? The console app will give you access to all the logs that macOS keeps. And then from there, you can open the logs that FileMaker Server keeps in its own logs folder. And this will be a live view, right? As FileMaker Server adds entries to those logs, you will see them happen in real time. So this is the place where you would go to see them and see events from other areas of the operating system, some hardware-related events possibly, and have a good picture of what is happening event-wise on your FileMaker Server. Now, there are also other tools available, industry standard tools almost, right? So I have one that I run on my network called Zabbix. It's open source, and with some configuration, I can configure it. I install basically an agent, a Zabbix agent on my FileMaker servers, and it'll report back to my centralized monitor, and I can basically configure it to track anything. And not only gives it information to me that I can track across all my servers, these tools also allow you to send out email notifications, pagers if you're still using pagers, or even run schedules or scripts when a certain event has happened on your FileMaker server, right? So these monitoring tools that are available, and Zabbix is just one of them. There's Nagios, Cacti, and some of the other ones. There's open source ones, there's for pay ones. IT departments typically will be familiar with at least one or a few of these. Just want to plant the seed there that it's actually very easy, or fairly easy, to integrate your FileMaker server deployments with these tools that IT may already be familiar with. If you're not familiar with these tools, those are actually really good tools to learn and to get up to speed on. All right, so this has been a bit of a whirlwind tour of the 3 admin touch points: the admin console, the admin command line, and the admin API, plus some pointers on how to monitor both the statistics and the events that happen on your FileMaker server. And again, making the point that a lot more information is available in those tech briefs, and a longer session will be done by myself at DevCon. And with that, I'll give it back to Ronnie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wim. Oh, so much great information here. As we promised, we are going to be answering questions here, and we've got several already in. So if you haven't submitted your questions yet, please do so now. While you do so, we'd like to share a couple of resources with you that we think are very important. As Wim mentioned before, there's an amazing white paper that was co-authored between Wim DeCord and Stephen Blackwell, both very knowledgeable in the FileMaker platform, and is available here on this URL. It goes into great depth into both FileMaker Server security and monitoring, and all the tools that we saw here today. We'd also like to take the opportunity to invite you, let you know that our developer conference this year is happening on August from the 6th to the 9th. There are still slots available. It'll be happening this year in Dallas, Texas, and it's an amazing place to gather a lot of information, also network with other people. Wim will be there diving in much deeper into these tools and have other really interesting sessions there as well. So, all right, so we'll take a few minutes here to answer some of the questions that have been pouring in here. Wim, one of the questions that came in here was there a way to transfer your settings from an older installation to a newer?
Yes, you can. You can actually import your settings from your FileMaker 16 file, and obviously between 17 servers, there is a place in the admin console where you can save your settings. So that's one way to do it. And obviously with the admin API, right, you can make your calls to get all the settings that you want and store them, because in essence, you get back the JSON that you need to send back to FileMaker Server if you want to reapply them, right? So schedules, settings, all of that, that would be my preferred way of doing it. Just make a call to the admin API, save the JSON, and that's it. I can just recreate my schedules and my settings just by making API calls using any of those tools that I mentioned, either Postman or some of the great tools that people have built.
Very good. Yeah, it's actually very good. Actually answers another question. Somebody was asking here, there is a way to get the schedules from the API and transfer those. So absolutely right. You can download those, yep. Store those, and then send them back using the admin API as well. Another question over here asks, does the between setting for the schedule mean that the task will automatically halt at the end of that time?
Yes, that's the one that I showed briefly in my setup. It will be a task that repeats every hour between the start and end time that you specified.
Very good. We've got a lot of people asking if this webinar will be available online later. This is a question for us. Yes, absolutely. We'll be sending out links with the recording of this webinar. So absolutely, you'll be able to review this information and share it with other people as well. Is there somebody's asking here, is there a way to monitor external authentication if it's working or not?
That's a good question. There's probably the best way to do that would be to use the access log, which is available, right? So if you're wondering if people are logging in, I would use the access log as my first place to check whether I see the expected issues. That's probably the best way to do it. There's no log specific around external authentication, but the access log would be the one that I use.
Good. Yeah, many people asking about rewatching this. Again, there's a lot of great information here. So somebody was asking here, maybe this is not so much of a console question, but more about optimizing your deployment. Somebody's asking you, what's a good way to gauge your FileMaker 17 for cache?
It's a great question, right? And there's no simple answer. The default setting is 512 megabytes. The best way to gauge that is to use the statistics log, right? Because that's what it's there for. It will give you information about how FileMaker is dealing with memory, and it's in particular, it has two counters: the cache hit percentage and the cache. That's probably three: cache hits, cache saved, and cache unsaved. So those will be the ones that I keep an eye on, right? So if your cache hit percentage consistently dips below 100%, I would up the cache. But I wouldn't up it if you had, say, 4 gigs available. I wouldn't set it to 4 necessarily, right? That may be a waste of resources. I would start with the default and bump it up gradually, maybe, I don't know, 500 megs at a time, and then keep an eye on those 3 counters. Your cache hit percentage should hit 100% consistently, except perhaps during backup times where it dips just slightly. But certainly keep an eye on the cache unsaved percentage. That should be really, really low, if not to say 0.
Perfect, thank you. Somebody's asking here, I think it's a good question. What's the difference between the admin console for FileMaker Cloud versus the admin console for FileMaker Server 17?
That is a good question. The main differences will be around the features that are different between the two products, right? FileMaker Cloud, the best way to describe it is that the FileMaker Cloud is in essence a subset of the full FileMaker Server, right? There's a few things that are not available. Case in point, the PHP custom web publishing that is not available through the FileMaker Cloud, right? So there's a few functional differences between the two products, and that translates into what would be different in either the admin API or the admin console.
Absolutely, very, very good. Got other questions. Somebody, actually, a couple of people asking very similar questions, so I'm going to kind of paraphrase. Is the admin console, does it have enough features for most of us? But basically, some people are asking whether or not they're really going to need the command line or the admin API.
And that's a great question, right? And something that we've pondered when we first saw the admin console. And clearly, one of the design goals is to make it easier to set up your FileMaker server, right? And I think that really works. Obviously, we didn't show how to go through the installation process, but it's exceedingly easy, much easier than it was before. Once you have your admin console, I would say about 80% of the deployments will just use the admin console and find it adequate. Will you need to use the command line interface and the API? I certainly will, because those are great tools, and I like those kinds of tools because it means I can build my own things. If you don't want to spend the time, you cannot spend the time to learn those yourself, or you use them so infrequently that you don't feel like you've become proficient, then I turn it back to those tools that the community has already built, right? Because every single little feature that either the CLI or the admin API makes available is now already available through some sort of UI, like the web-based one that Align has, or any of the FileMaker-based ones from Datamatics, TMS, Productive Computing. So it's already there. You don't really need to learn the CLI or the admin API if you don't want to. I would encourage you to do so because they're great tools.
Absolutely agree. I think we have time for just one more question. Somebody was asking here, I've actually got 3 questions, very similar, about viewing logs live. What would be your recommended way of trying to keep track of those and looking at kind of a live view of those log files instead of having to download them first?
Sure, I would use the Windows Event Viewer if it's a Windows server, right? Because you can refresh, you can look at them there, you'll see exactly what it is, and you'll see the other things that are happening. On Mac OS, if you use that app, the console app, that is built into Mac OS, and you open the log that lives inside the FileMaker Server logs folder, it'll be live, right? So you'll actually see it happening as it happens. And you could, if you're proficient with the terminal command line, you can get the same result, right? You can use some commands, I believe something like tail, where you can actually have your terminal hook into the log file and update as new entries are happening at the same time, right? So the operating system really has all the tools that we would need to do that. So those are the ones that I would use.
Perfectly. Perfect. Very good. With that, this concludes all the time that we have here for today. We thank you so much for having us here and being part of this webinar today. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great rest of the day. And we'll be sending a link with the recording of this session. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.